I think first it's important, Mike, to baseline on what are we talking about here. In signal loss, it's about privacy. It's about privacy regulation in places like California that are really defining the US marketplace. It's also about the policy changes of some of the big tech players that control things like the browser or the mobile operating systems. And when we're talking about signal loss and privacy, we're often talking about, a lot of the marketers and sellers I know are talking about the challenges with targeting and retargeting and all those kind of issues. And that's one thing. It's very complicated. It's mostly a negative story. With measurement, it's also a complicated issue, but it's a lot more defined, I think. And I think of it mostly as identity. You need to, in measurement, be able to understand the household or the individual that was exposed to an ad, and then count them accurately. That's audience measurement. And then you need to be able to connect them, match them to behaviors and other outcomes that happen, like sales, or you need to be able to serve them a survey to ask them what seeing that ad did for them. And so identity is going to be a real challenge on the open web going forward. Without cookies, classic attribution is just dead. Like, it really is. It's not dead yet because cookies aren't dead yet, but the moment cookies are gone, classic attribution of a pixel or a tag in an ad server and a pixel or a tag on a website and just matching those, that's gone. But a lot of the platforms that we work with in convergent TV or CTV are not susceptible to that problem because they have logged in identified users, and they have the permission to be using that information to work with partners like EDO to be able to connect who saw an ad to what happened next. And we've also gone further and innovated a lot in methods like aggregated matching, where you don't need to see the individual user. You can just see clusters of people who have similar characteristics, like where they live in a small geographic setting and the time or the small time frame where they were exposed or not exposed to an ad, and then we can do a bunch of really innovative matching off of those characteristics. So I think in measurement, it's a much more defined problem, and I think there's a lot of innovation that's solving for it now.
So this is happening, this signal loss is happening at the same time that TV is trying to become more like digital, more precise. Does this broadly hold it back, or because of the cookie thing, TV fares better overall?
Right. Well, TV, yeah, I think TV has a big advantage in this environment for two reasons. One, with national live linear TV or local live linear, you're not using a cookie anyway. You're matching on a smart TV's identifier like a machine ID or an IP address. Those are considered PII in places like California, so you have to be careful about using privacy-safe techniques and things that are compliant with those regulations. But people like EDO and lots of other players are finding there's a lot of options to solving for that. When it comes to streaming TV on advertising-supported platforms, again, the vast majority of those are logged-in users, logged-in households, and often with individual profiles. Not perfect, but it's close enough in most cases, where you can do very privacy-compliant matching on an actual identity of a subscriber, so an email address, a telephone number, a physical address in some cases, and their billing information. Again, the explicit permission has to be there, but once you have that, then you're in a pretty good place to match that against other data sets that you can bring to bear, again, in privacy-safe ways. So I think it's less vulnerable than the open web. It's less vulnerable than some of these social networks where you have a lot of mobile usage going on across many different devices.
Aside from all the signal loss changes, TV is facing the challenge of measuring cross-platform. It seems like that's getting more challenging. Where are we in that path?
Right. So cross-platform is a real big topic for everyone. We care about that, and that's where things like identity resolution is so important. And EDO, many other players in this marketplace have a real investment in identity resolution to know that multiple screens are really resolving to a single household, and then trying to understand who's in that household. Again, we don't want to know the individual as much as we want to understand the characteristics of that household and what the likeliest types of attributes are of that household. So again, true identity is not as critical as a good indication of who's seeing or not seeing ads and what's happening next.
You mentioned a few times true identity may not be as important in television. There are some that would envision TV targeting to be just like digital, where you're going to have an ad for every individual viewer. Do we want to go there? Is that a place that we need to try and go?
I think it's going to vary a lot by what type of TV we're talking about watching, the type of programming fundamentally. When you've got live sports, you've got many people watching at once who are highly engaged with the ads and of course the content. In those cases, there's a whole very large group of types of marketers who want to reach all of those people all at once. There's a real value in that kind of mass reach, that mass engaged reach, I should say. And so things like sports have a big advantage for the marketer, and as from a seller's perspective, you really see a lot of benefit of selling all of your audience to one brand at a time with a simple one price for all of those people. Because if you start selling just little bits of that audience, you can quickly fragment your sale and lose your biggest advantage, which is your mass engaged reach. So for all those reasons, I think things that are very popular to be watched live are going to stay predominantly mass targeted. Now that's not to say we're not going to see innovation that is digital in its nature. I think you're going to see the ability for one brand to deliver multiple different types of creatives simultaneously in a break to different audience members based on characteristics like where they live, their income levels, etc. And so not everyone sees the same ad for a Tacoma truck from Toyota. They might see a minivan Sienna for certain families, trucks in certain geographies, and you might see totally different other vehicles and other creatives in other parts of the country or audience demographics. I think creative is where you're going to see a lot of innovation that is fundamentally digital in its nature.
Lastly, I wonder, you talk to a lot of marketers and agencies. I wonder how informed they are and tuned into all these issues they are. What kind of questions are you hearing?
You hear very sophisticated questions from a hardcore group of the people who are day to day in the technology and measurement sides of these agencies and of these brands. I think a lot of the rest of the marketing ecosystem is focused on the classic things you also need to be good at, which is understand your audience or your target customer, understand the pros and cons of different media choices, understand what creative is working and what's not. So the intersection of those places where I think partners like EDO and others in the marketplace, we're bringing a lot of value, is helping them bridge those very deep details with some of those perennial needs like audience, media, creative.